On March 25, 2026, senior property lawyers arrived at the Crown Estate offices with a legal file containing years of Prince Edward's quiet preparations, agreements and documents meant to prove what had been granted to him and what could not be taken away. At the center was a key question: how had the youngest son secured something the king believed he could still control? The answer goes back to Queen Elizabeth II's final decisions before her death in 2022. Aware of rising tensions around titles and authority, she ensured the Duke of Edinburgh title would pass to Edward, honoring Prince Philip's legacy. King Charles III confirmed this in 2023. Bagshot Park, the estate linked to the title, was also expected to remain tied to Edward, preserving continuity. However, after the Queen's death, King Charles began reviewing royal property and finances, questioning long-held assumptions. By 2026, this turned into formal legal scrutiny, prompting Edward to present documentation to defend his position, transforming a routine review into a quiet but serious legal standoff. There was pressure being applied behind closed doors to change how members of the family lived, and Bagshot Park became a target. This is where it turns ugly. Edward received the dukedom in 2023 after waiting his entire life for it, after watching his father carry that title for decades, and finally stepping into that role. But within 3 years, the same institution that gave it to him began trying to strip away the home that gave the title meaning. He was not just being challenged, he was being weakened, because without Bagshot Park the Duke becomes empty, just a name without a base and a title without real power. What makes this even worse is what Edward actually inherited with that estate. Bagshot Park was in poor condition when it was first offered. Back in 1996, after the army chaplain left, it was worn down, outdated, and neglected for years. The Crown Estate had even considered turning it into a hotel or conference center because it held so little practical value at the time. Instead, it was leased to Edward in 1998 under strict terms of £5,000 a year for 50 years. But that cheap lease came with a heavy responsibility. He had to restore it, and he did. He invested over £1.36 million of his own money before he was even a full-time working royal, and the total restoration reached nearly £2.98 million. The Crown Estate covered part of it, but Edward still carried a major financial burden. Once completed, his rent was adjusted to £90,000 a year, which the National Audit Office confirmed as fair market value. Unlike others, he followed the system properly. Even Prince Andrew, who lived at Royal Lodge, was repeatedly questioned over not paying equivalent rates. One brother followed rules and obligations, the other did not. Edward then strengthened his position further in 2007 by paying £5 million through his company to extend the lease to 150 years, securing long-term control and financial stability over the property. Today, Bagshot Park is worth around £30 million, meaning if the Crown Estate regains control, it could be sold or released for huge profit. That is why pressure began building again, not just over modernization, but over value and control sitting in plain sight. This is where Philip's role becomes impossible to ignore. He saw how these systems worked and ensured protections were written down before his death. That letter of intent tying Bagshot Park to the dukedom was meant to prevent exactly this kind of dispute. By March 2026, Edward's legal defense included lease agreements, the Queen's intentions, and decades of financial contribution proving responsibility and investment. But even then, nothing was guaranteed. Because Charles still controlled the structure that could make life inside the monarchy difficult without breaking any rules. And when those documents were opened inside the palace, it became clear the fight was not over, it had only just begun. The Queen's decision reflected clear trust, and Camilla's audit challenged that. Years earlier, in 1999, Edward had helped design a black and white pearl set for Sophie to match the anthem tiara, retaining design rights. His legal team argued both pieces formed a single artistic set, strengthening his claim that they could not be separated. The matter was also deeply personal. Sophie wore the tiara at her wedding and later showed her close bond with the Queen in a 2019 speech. By March 25, 2026, tensions escalated. Edward's team warned they could release private letters from Queen Elizabeth II confirming Sophie's ownership, turning the issue into one of reputation and history. The tiara ultimately remained with Sophie under protection. The situation then became more personal as Princess Anne stepped in. Though once distant, Anne and Sophie grew close after Prince Philip's death in 2021 while supporting the Queen, leading to Anne's direct involvement in this sensitive dispute. The shift was clear when Sophie quietly placed a hand on Anne's back as they stood by the coffin, a small gesture that showed growing trust. By March 2026, that bond had become protective and decisive. So when Princess Anne entered the meeting with King Charles III, she came not as Edward's sister, but to defend their mother's decisions. She warned that if Queen Elizabeth II's private gifts could be questioned or reversed, it would weaken the authority of every monarch. Her key point was sharp: if their mother's signed decisions were not respected, then Charles's authority would carry even less weight in the future, and had closely reviewed the Bagshot Park agreement and saw it as clear. Edward had paid, the Crown estate had accepted, and the legal terms still stood. To her, both the property and the tiara followed the same principle. They were personally approved and legally backed decisions of the Queen. She cautioned that challenging one agreement could put all of them at risk, undermining trust in the monarchy itself. For Anne, this was not just legal, it was personal. Having lost both parents, she understood the emotional weight behind these decisions and saw them as tied to memory, respect, and continuity. And had seen this pattern before through her closeness to Princess Diana, watching her lose status, support, and ultimately her place. Seeing pressure rise again, she refused to stay silent. She warned Charles that if Camilla did not step back, she would act publicly, even threatening a full audit of the Queen's household, including finances tied to Camilla, something taken seriously given Anne's reputation for discipline. She also pushed back against quiet pressure on Edward's children, insisting their roles should be their own choice. By the end of the meeting, Charles faced a difficult choice: back Camilla and risk weakening his authority, or step back and accept limits. Advisors later concluded Edward's legal position was strong, reinforced by a letter witnessed by Prince Philip confirming both his and Queen Elizabeth II's intent to protect Edward and Sophie's position. But despite this, tensions remained, and Camilla did not step back. She wanted the same rules applied across the royal family, which meant tighter control over private gifts like the tiara and properties such as Bagshot Park, ensuring everything stayed under central authority. This is where the conflict began. Edward and Sophie were already partly operating outside that structure, with a secured home and financial independence, which made them harder to control, so every new move began to look like an attempt to reduce that independence and bring them back under authority. As tensions grew inside the palace, staff quietly began aligning with different sides. Support for Sophie's household increased in some areas while resentment toward the Queen's office also grew, and once divisions formed, leaks followed as internal discussions and sensitive information started slipping closer to exposure, breaking the palace's usual discipline. One insider described it as the king being led into a minefield, forced to balance his wife's demands with decisions made by his mother, with no outcome that avoided damage. Outside the palace, pressure was also rising because public opinion would not easily accept a king challenging his brother over a home restored at private expense during a time of financial strain in the country. Charles reportedly sent a handwritten note requesting a family meeting, but Edward refused without his legal team present, turning a family issue into a formal legal standoff. From that point, Charles was no longer dealing with reconciliation but resistance, and the dynamic had permanently changed. The outcome became clear: the anthem tiara stayed with Sophie, and the Bagshot Park review was quietly closed, effectively confirming existing arrangements. Edward's title, home, and agreements remained secure under Queen Elizabeth II's decisions, meaning the challenge failed. However, unity was not restored. Charles and Edward's relationship grew distant and formal, with trust replaced by caution. Within the family, two sides became visible: Charles and Camilla on one side, and Edward, and Sophie on the other, with William and Catherine seen as quietly aligned with them. The divide showed that real power in the monarchy depends on trust, not just titles.